morning and welcome to today's webinar brought to you by MACF and Florida Makes. I am your host, Christian Davidson, Director of Marketing of MACF. Today is February 25th, 2021. Continuing our series of webinar topics on Grow with Google, today's topic is using data to drive business growth with our presenter, Matt Weber, National Google Supported Trainer. A few housekeeping notes. As a participant, your audio will be in listen-only mode using your computer or phone, whichever is more convenient. Additionally, you will have the opportunity to ask your questions using the question window or also the chat window. This is a live webinar and it is being recorded. A link to this recording will be provided to you within a few days. Now, I'd like to turn this presentation over to Matt Weber. Matt, I think, real quick, Matt, I think you're muted.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Using Data to Drive Business Growth. I'm Matt Weber, one of the national trainers for Grow with Google. Grow with Google is an enormous program that has a variety of resources for small and medium-sized businesses, as well as teachers and job seekers. Now, pre-COVID, the biggest part of Grow with Google was these instructional programs that were held in person all across the country. But after COVID, the material has been adapted so that we can share them in webinars just like this. If you want to see a little bit more of what's inside the Grow with Google program, you can go to google.com/grow. But I'm going to be sharing more about the details about Grow with Google, as well as some additional resources from Google that you don't want to miss later on in the program. I'm so excited that some of you took time out of your busy day to learn about data. I think that's fantastic. But before we begin, I have a little bit of a confession to make. We're not really going to talk about data. What we're going to talk about really are insights, because as you can see on the screen, what the former chairman of Unilever said is that data just kind of makes your briefcase heavy. It's really insights that make you rich. And what I've found in working with small and medium-sized businesses all across the country is that very few of them say they lack data. In fact, most of them report, and maybe you do too, that we're all drowning in data. Your accounting package is kicking out data, maybe your website hosting is kicking out data, your CRM is kicking out data. I mean, my gosh, I got an email yesterday from my car with as much data on it about my driving habits and its status. It was more data than my bank would produce 5 years ago. We're all drowning in data. So the key today is to really turn them into insights. So what exactly are insights? In order to be an insight, first something has to be novel. It has to be new. I'm sure if at the end of today's program and you spent an hour with me and I taught you how to find out things you already knew, you wouldn't be too pleased. So today we're going to focus on trying to find insights that are new to you. The second thing that makes a good insight is that it's credible. This is where the data comes in. Why do we believe a particular theory or hypothesis? What can we do to substantiate that? So it's got to be credible. And then third, and really most importantly, it's got to be actionable. Now, my side job is teaching for Google at programs like this all across the country, but my full-time job is running a digital agency here in Altamont Springs, Florida. And as you can imagine in that role, I'm surrounded with people handing me reports and data. And if you hung around me for any time, you'd hear me say the word therefore. Therefore, what? So I'm given a lot of these charts and graphs about our clients' results, and I say, therefore, what? What are we going to do about it? It has to be actionable. If we can't find an insight that is actionable, then all we've done is just created some fascinating party conversation. So today's focus is going to be on insights that are actionable, that we can put to use to improve your digital marketing. Now, I brought two people with me for this journey today, and as I tell you a little bit about them, I think you're going to say they look and sound a little familiar to you. This is the mother and daughter team of Tracy Noonan and Danielle Village. Now, in 2010, they took a cake decorating class, and they liked it so much, and it really tapped into one of their passions. Not a whole lot later, they decided to open their first cake decorating and cupcake store in October of 2011 in Massachusetts. Well, their reputation grew to the point that it wasn't just walk-in traffic they were getting, as they were getting phone calls and emails about how can they get cupcakes delivered to them outside of their tiny town in Massachusetts. But that was a challenge for them because they didn't have a way to keep cupcakes fresh for more than a couple days. That's a problem I really couldn't empathize with because I've never been in the presence of a cupcake for more than a couple of minutes. But this was a challenge that was limiting their growth. And then they had their big idea. And their big idea was cupcakes in mason jars. So they started putting the filling and the frosting and the layers of cake in a mason jar. And when they did that, it could stay fresh for 10 days. And they took that big idea onto a popular TV show, Shark Tank. And they were in front of 10 million people. And shortly after that, they kind of became the go-to website for cool and gourmet cupcakes. But before that explosion happened in 2012, they attended a program just like this. They attended a Grow with Google event as a small and medium-sized business. The reason they came to that event is because they were making decisions, maybe like all of us do at some time or another. They were making their business decisions with their gut. And maybe you're like me, and maybe you're guilty of this sometimes. You know, they confessed that they experimented with some new recipes, and if they both looked at each other and if they both liked it, then they put it on the menu. And they had some tough times, like we all do, and their immediate reflex to those tough times when sales were down was to cut prices. And they were pretty strongly convinced that their target audience was women 35 to 54. But they had no data to support all of this. So I think as we begin this program, you would agree, based on our progression here, that these insights were not credible. So we really can't call them insights at all. So let's get a little bit deeper, and to do that, I just want to make sure we're all using the same terminology. When I talk about data, I'm going to be talking about facts or statistics, kind of snapshots of a single instance in time. Some of you get data from your website hosting provider or perhaps your digital marketing provider, and they are just that, captures of moments in time. When we talk about analytics, we're really talking about patterns and trends. And in digital marketing, just like in stock investing, it is the trend that's your friend. And then finally, when we talk about an insight, we're talking about combining those two above elements and trying to discover something that we can put to use, that we can confidently put a change in place based on those above two elements. So I just want to make sure we're using the same nomenclature as we progress through today's program. Now, before we go too much further, we're going to talk about a 3-step process to using data. And the reason we're outlining this 3-step process is because if you have ever logged into Google Analytics or any similar analytics program, I'm pretty confident you felt a pretty strong sense of being overwhelmed. Man, there's a lot there. There's just a boatload of stuff to look at. So we instead are going to talk about this 3-step process, because if we tried to teach you everything about analytics, we would fail. So instead, we're going to use this 3-step process to cut to the heart of what you need to find that insight. So we're going to put just a small set of blinders on in this program and try to focus on what we need to see to lead us to that insight. And to do that, we're going to begin by simply talking about what are your goals? What are we trying to achieve, right? Because there's a lot of data out there that at the end of the day is going to be noise that doesn't really help us advance our business. So we're going to try to eliminate the noise by establishing a goal. And then the second thing we're going to do in the upcoming program is we're going to talk about how do we ask questions? Because the route to going through an analytics program to find the answers to specific questions is much less challenging than trying to understand all of the data that's out there. So the key is to develop questions that bring us closer to our goal. And then the third step in this process is we're going to analyze the information available. We're going to view reports. So we're going to try to connect up the answers to those questions, which help us achieve our goal. So we're going to put a little set of blinders on as we go forward and dive into data. So let's start with a goal. Now there's something that's being taught today that probably was being taught when you were in middle school or high school. It's probably been being taught for close to 50 years now. And that is the idea of a SMART goal. So not just any goal, but a SMART goal is one that is specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time sensitive. So lots of research has gone into what determines whether some goals are achieved and what goals are not. And generally all of that research comes back to validate this SMART system of developing a goal, that your goal should match all of these attributes. So let's take a look at Tracy and Danny. They had a goal coming into this program way back in 2012, and they had a goal of decreasing their shopping cart abandonment to under 60%. Now, for those of you that don't run e-commerce websites, it's a popular problem for e-commerce websites that people put things into the cart and for whatever reason don't follow through and conclude the purchase. And a whole lot of factors go into why that happens. But they were, at the time, suffering with a very high abandonment rate, somewhere around 85 to 90%. So think about the drag that was happening on their marketing dollars when such a high percentage of people were taking steps 1 and steps 2, but not the final step that led to a sale. So let's look at their goal in terms of being a SMART goal. Is it specific? Yes, it's very specific. Is it measurable? Yes, definitely measurable. Is it attainable? That's a little hard to say, but we're going to give them the benefit of the doubt on this one. It sounds like it could be. Is it relevant to their business? Would it make a material difference in their business if it was accomplished? No question, absolutely. And finally, is it time sensitive? No, it's not. So this is where they would have failed on achieving a SMART goal for this purpose. In order for this to be a SMART goal, they would have had to say that we want to decrease shopping cart abandonment to under 60% within maybe 90 to 120 days or 120 to 150 days. If they would have added that element, that would make it a SMART goal. So one of the first things I'm going to ask you to do, and you can maybe do it on a piece of paper as we're kind of going through this program, is think about, for your business from a digital marketing standpoint, what is a SMART goal? And the more you can enunciate and clarify that SMART goal as we go through this, then you're going to be able to connect up some of the tips and tactics we give to your situation, and I think it'll make a greater impact. So if you can do that kind of side by side as we progress slowly onward, think about what a SMART goal would be for your business. And remember, write that acronym down: SMART: specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, time sensitive. So map out that goal. And then once we map out that goal, now we're going to ask questions. And here's where we're going to put on those blinders. But it isn't just any question that we're going to ask. We're actually going to narrow this down, and we're going to talk about 4 very specific types of questions. And the reason I'm hoping is that you wrote down a goal at this point in the program is because each of these groups of questions lie in whether or not they're going to help you achieve your goal. So if you're participating in the program today, you will not be developing questions in all 4 of these groups. Instead, you'll listen carefully and say, well, which of these types of questions help me reach my goal? So let's go through them and see which ones connect up with your goal. The first one is called reach type of questions. And our reach type of questions pertain to kind of the outside world. They kind of pertain to what are people searching for when they look for what you offer? Who is your audience? How do they find you online? A reach question might be, what days of the week are people typically more likely to find you, or what hours of the day are people more likely to find you? So you can tell in reach questions, we're kind of talking about the very beginning part of the process. In many ways, before they've engaged with your website or your brand. So we're going to think about what kind of reach questions would help us achieve our goal. And then you're going to find out in just a few minutes that these categorizations of questions actually tie into the structure of Google Analytics. You're going to see some parallels coming up in just a minute. But before we get into that, let's talk about the second type of questions, which are engagement questions. And this pertains to what do people do when they come in contact with you. So reach questions, they haven't come in contact with you yet. Engage questions, they have. And engage questions are, well, so they hit your website, what do they do? What page do they land on? What do they do after they hit their initial page? Where do customers engage with you? So today, a lot of you are going to be very concerned about your website. That makes a lot of sense. Some businesses, the engagement is happening on a Google My Business profile, or maybe a social media outlet. So where do customers engage with you? Where is that first level of connection points? And then what happens after they make that first level of engagement? So as you can see, when we were talking about Tracy and Danny, people looked at a product, they clicked the button that said, put it in the cart. So we want to ask an engagement questions that say, what do people do after they put products in a cart if we were trying to achieve Tracy and Danny's goal? The next type of questions are really going to be money-making questions. So you're going to hear the cash register ring a little bit because we call these convert questions. Now let's take just a little bit of a step back, because in terms of terminology, a conversion in website analytics is the thing that you've designed your website to have people do. Ideally, every website is designed with an end goal in mind. You typically design websites backwards. You typically figure out what it is that you want them to do, and then you build the website to try to achieve that end action. So it could be anything as simple as generating a phone call. It could be filling out a form. It could be downloading a catalog. It could be watching a particular video that is helpful. Each of you might have a different end action for your website, but it should be there by purpose, and it now should be measured. And if it's measured correctly in analytics, we're going to call that a conversion. So if someone comes to the website, it is sufficiently persuaded to fill out a form, to speak to a specialist, to request an appointment, whatever that is relative to your business, that action now becomes a conversion, and ideally you're measuring that. So now with that context being made, you can see that conversion questions are about the environmental factors that go into eliciting that action, such as, what channels drive these conversions? And by channels, I mean the different routes that people get to your website. Organic search, paid search, social media, links from other websites. So you get traffic from a bunch of different sources, but they're not all equal in terms of their ability to influence conversions. So if we have a conversion-oriented goal, we're going to want to understand which channels drive these conversions to begin with. Now, you also might have more than one conversion on your website, and that means you probably have more than what is called a call to action, or a CTA. Some of the common ones you might see is that you might have a subscribe to our newsletter button on your website. You might have a speak to one of our specialists form that allows people, or you might actually let someone choose some materials and get some type of an estimate on your website. Those all might be very valid and multiple conversions. So what CTA actually drives those conversions? And by the way, just a little bit of a sidebar here, there's some really fascinating research being done on language and design that influence people to do certain things. Like something as simple as changing the language on a button can have dramatic results. You may have seen some older websites where at the bottom of the form it says submit. We know pretty extensively now that people don't come to a website to submit something. And we know that when you change that language of that button to be more in line with what they are trying to achieve, get a quote, schedule an appointment, talk to a specialist, the more the button language lines up with where mentally they want to go, we know that that has a strong effect on their ability and desire to push that button. So that's called a call to action. What is the language that is seeking them to elicit that action? So what calls to action actually drive conversions? Now here's a really interesting thing that's happening now. Is we talk about which channels are driving the higher return on investment, ROI. So the exciting new development of lead scoring and lead rating, this understanding that not all leads are equal, and the idea that some channels produce more productive and beneficial leads, leads that are more likely to close to a sale. So if you're on today's program and your business involves lead generation and converting those leads to a sale, and perhaps you have a long sales cycle, the next great area for you is connecting the dots between the lead being generated and the sale being made, and then connecting those dots backward to where did those leads come from. So we might ask in these conversion type questions, which channels have a higher ROI? Now I've put this last type of questions last as sustaining type questions because it's not relevant to every single one of you. Sustaining questions are how does a person come back to the website? How does the website bring multiple levels of value to the user? So for example, the MACF website is really about sustaining relationships. They want multiple engagements. They want people to come back over and over again. So sustaining questions are, do people continue to engage? Do they come back? If so, do they come back during the same channel that they came originally? And what is the time and day or the duration or the span of first visits to second visits that help us understand this sustaining relationship? Probably only relevant to just a small number of you, but those are called sustaining questions. So let's recap the 4 types of questions that you may be thinking of to achieve your goal. Reach questions, engage questions, convert questions, and sustaining questions. Now, once we've formulated our questions, let's see where we go to get the answers. And here's where we're going to talk about reports. Now, there's lots of Google programs out there that are going to be helpful, and there's lots of web analytics programs out there, but singularly, the most popularly used analytics program today is Google Analytics. Now, not only is it a completely robust program, but it's also free, which gives it a pretty attractive attribute there. And if you haven't already installed it, it's definitely going to be on your 1A code red priority list for sure, because we can't really get to a lot of these insights without having Google Analytics or similar program. Now, you can find Google Analytics at google.com/analytics. And depending on your technical capabilities, You might be able to install it yourself, but even if you need professional consultation, the maximum it's going to take is anywhere from 1 to 3 hours. And whatever you have to pay to get Google Analytics fully installed on your website, you'll make that back 100 times over, either by these improvements that we're talking about or simply stopping the things that aren't productive right now. So here's step one. Let's make sure you have analytics installed and have it fully installed on your website. And again, you start that process at google.com/analytics. Now, once you get into analytics, it's going to be subdivided into 5 large categories. And as we go through this, you can see now we're going to begin to see this parallel structure between how Google Analytics is organized and the types of questions we needed to ask in order to achieve our goal. So Google Analytics is divided into real-time, conversions, audience, acquisition, and behavior. So if we change the name, you could see that conversions are going to relate to our converting type questions, behavior is going to relate to our engagement type questions, and acquisition is going to relate to our reach type questions. So let's explore each one of these categories just a little bit further. The good news here is if at this part of the program, if you're feeling at all overwhelmed, here's something most of you may not have to think too much about, and that's the real-time section. If you go into Google Analytics and click on this section, it is exactly that. It's what's happening right now, like this instant. If you want to see data about the people that have their footprints on your website right now, this is where you would go. Most websites don't aggregate enough instantaneous traffic for this section to be useful. So it's not going to be heavily on your radar for things to understand or use. Where might it be valuable? Well, think about when Danny and Tracy went on Shark Tank in front of 10 million people. Their website exploded. They could have gotten some good engagement data about that bubble, that burst, by looking into that real-time section. Or maybe you're going to drop a pretty large email, and we know that most emails are opened within an hour after they're distributed. So maybe you look at the real-time section if you're going to drop a large email. Other than that, or if you're going on Shark Tank soon, probably not going to be a section that brings you real value. So let's go on to the next section, which is conversions. And this is where I really want you to spend some time, because again, this is the end, right? At the end of the day, the website's function for most of us is to help the sales of our business. And if it's not converting, it's probably not bringing a benefit to the sales of our business. So inside this section, if you look closely at your screen, and this is an e-commerce website, this is Tracy and Danny's website, you can see that their conversion rate is 14.16% at the top there, kind of on the left-hand side. A way to interpret that would be to say that 14.16% of the visitors that came to this website during this time period purchased a product. So that's their e-commerce conversion rate, which would be pretty healthy by any standard. So that yielded 37,431 transactions, and it yielded just under $2 million in revenue with an average order value of $48.06. Now, if you don't sell things online, that's okay, because the other version of this data is just as important. We're still going to see a conversion rate, the percentage of people that took your desired action, and that's going to be a key metric to chart over time. If we want to get more productivity out of our website, we're going to have to increase our conversion rate and talk about those factors that are influencing the conversion rate. Remember, one of the questions that we asked is, what channels are driving the conversions? So if we look down here, we can see each of those channels that we talked about: Google organic, some affiliate traffic, some paid traffic, and email that they dropped. And we can see the different types and sources of revenue, the amount of revenue that each one of those channels drop. So if you've got a limited time and budget and you discover that a certain channel is more productive for you than another, well, let's start putting our time and effort into that channel and scaling back our time and effort and money onto the channels that aren't productive. So this is where some of those conversion questions can be really helpful. We also want to explore who's visiting the website, because the more we know about our productive visitors, the more we can find those people and get more of them. So we can tell what age range people are, we can tell what gender they are, and all gives us a greater understanding of how to narrow potentially our marketing. Here we get this view of what words are actually driving some of the traffic and some of the conversions. So these are search queries. These are the words that people actually typed into Google that caused this website to show up on a Google search engine results page. And now we can track the data, not just by channel, not just by demographic, but actually their language. And today their language can be most insightful, because what we're finding out is it's not so much what we describe what we do or how we describe what we do. What's really key is understanding how our prospects describe what we do. Because if our language isn't lined up with how they view the world and the words that they use, we're ultimately going to have difficulty being successful. So here we'll see all of those variations, and we'll see, as you can see on the far right-hand side there, the e-commerce conversion rate for each one of these phrases. So if we are going to do some marketing, whether it's digital or traditional marketing, the more we use the language of the consumer, the more likely our marketing is going to be to succeed. Now, we talked about engagement type questions, right? What do people do? And remember, way back in the beginning of the presentation, Tracy and Danny had a problem with abandonment. So what did people do after they put a product in the cart? What happened? This behavior flowchart that's available really gives insight into that. And so you can see in this starting column, these are the pages that people landed on, called a landing page, because that's their first point of entry on the website. And for this website, the home page was the most common point of entry. But don't be surprised when you look at the same data for your website if the home page is not the most common point of entry. You see, as people become more specific in how they search, then you might have interior pages that are lined up with those specifics of what people look for that might be the point of entry. So if you're a manufacturer and you talk about a specific part or a specific piece of equipment on an interior page, don't be surprised if that page is coming up in the search results and that's the point of entry for people. And that alone is a key discovery, because we tend to think of our home pages as the place to make a great first impression, only to find out that other pages are actually the ones where people make their first impression. And we maybe haven't dedicated the amount of time in the design and the user analysis for those pages that went into our homepage. The concept that everybody enters the site on a homepage is becoming less and less valuable as user behavior changes and their searches become more specific. So here we can use this behavior flow, and if we were looking at this data all the way down to the end, we would see for Danny and Tracy, people put people on the cart, they go to the cart page, and then what? Do they leave the website, or do they go back to the shipping page, or do they go back to continue shopping? We can discover that and find the vulnerabilities in that path. And a lot of times it's usually a single page that isn't lining up well with what the consumer expected, or a page that might not be rendering well on mobile, for example, that's causing these complications. So as you can see, if we have a goal, we ask the right questions, we can fairly quickly get to data in the right spot in Google Analytics to answer those questions, which will help us achieve our goal. So if you've mastered the three-step process, or you're leaving today's presentation understanding how valuable that three-step process can be, what do you do from here? What are your next steps? So certainly, again, redefine that SMART goal: specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time sensitive. Determine the questions that you have to ask in order to be able to achieve your goal, and then choose the tools. In most cases, it's going to be Google Analytics, to then find those answers, measure your results, take an action, and then we repeat that whole process. The great thing about digital marketing is our ability to test and iterate, measure, and change. So if you think about your website and your entire digital marketing strategy like a garden, you're going to be really well off, because we're always taking out the things that aren't working and putting in new things to plant and test. A good idea as to whether or not your company is going to benefit from today's program is to ask yourself this simple question: how long has it been since your company has made a material change in your website? So if the answer to that question is 6 months, 9 months, a year or more, you're getting a sense that you're not taking advantage of the massive optimization opportunities that digital marketing makes available to you. We can make a change, measure the result of the change, decide whether or not we want to continue it or introduce another variant. And by this continuing cycle of improvement, we get to achieve that goal and find out those factors that will bring us closer to that goal. So here's some other resources that I promised you in the beginning of the program that are going to be helpful. Here's one of my favorite apps that I keep on my phone. It's called Primer, and it comes from Google. So if today's program has left you with a thirst for a little bit more knowledge, Primer is the simplest way to do that, as Google has taken down digital marketing and digital analytics lessons, taking them down to very, very small bite-sized lessons. Most lessons are somewhere between 6 and 9 slides. I love this app because it's a great way to make your idle time productive. And if you've got even just a few minutes that you're waiting for someone, or you've got some time in between meetings, you just download this Primer app, available at both Google Play and in the iPhone App Store, and you can go through certain lessons. And if a lesson's not relevant to your company, you just skip it and go to the next one. What makes it so successful is that everything is as small and in as bite size as possible. Everything in here is designed to be immediately digestible. So that's why I think it's just a great tool for making idle time productive. But if you do want something more robust and something more substantial, there's a huge variety of actual online virtual classes that you can do at your own paces, and you'll find that in kind of a new offering from Google called Skillshop. And you can find Skillshop by going to g.co Skillshop. And here you'll find everything from classes on Google Ads to Google Analytics to Google Ads Manager, Google My Business, how to use YouTube as an advertising vehicle. It's all going to be in Skillshop. And this is if you want that more in-depth, go at your own pace kind of learning. I don't think there's anybody on the program today that has an e-commerce store, but just in case there is, there's special resources for e-commerce folks that are at g.co/growmystore. And YouTube, of course, is a phenomenal place to learn anything that you want about digital analytics. The only thing I ask you to make sure of is when you go, be careful, because of course there are lots of people that masquerade as Google, but you can get official certified Google content at g.co/grow/quick-help. That's g.co/grow/quick-help. And this content is consistently being updated, and most people are pretty amazed when they find out how quickly a lot of what we talked about today changes, and how quickly Google Analytics changes and Google Ads changes. So this is a great place to stay up to date with the latest changes, so that you know that what you're learning isn't immediately out of date. And as I mentioned in the very beginning of the program, the Grow with Google initiative itself has huge resources that can help just about any small business owner, teachers, job seekers, even people that want to learn how to be developers, can all get some great content at google.com/grow. So I really hope that this was beneficial for you, that you had an opportunity to focus on the data that's available to you that can help you achieve your goal and make your business more successful. So I'll turn it over to Christian, and we'll see if we had any questions today that I can answer.
Thank you, Matt. That was a great presentation filled with a lot of good information. And I know if our attendees are like me, you're just making notes of, okay, this is what I need to do next, especially for us with the MACF website. So I think I'll kick off some questions, and attendees, if you have questions, please go ahead and enter them now into the question box or on the chat, and we'll get those questions over to Matt for him to answer. But so for me, you know, I think MACF is lucky to have a great partner in Roar as far as our website management. But so if you're sitting there thinking to yourself, man, I have some work to do with my website, what do you recommend? What would be step one, Matt, as far as how do you get some of these changes done for your website?
Yeah, step one, kind of universally, is going to be getting good data. So anybody in any situation, any company, has to be able to say with confidence, I have good, reliable data. So step one is to audit your Google Analytics installation and to make sure that it's reporting accurate and reliable and credible data. And that's probably more important than it sounds, because I come across more faulty Google Analytics installations than I should. And most of the cases, faulty means it wasn't fully installed, like some of the data is missing. So nobody should be risking changes in their website without being the data to support it that we talked about. That's what makes these insights credible. So that is absolutely step one, is make sure that you have reliable, credible data to work with.
Thanks, Matt. Looks like we don't have any questions coming in so far.
I saw one that came in that said, with less trade shows that I was reliant on, how can I use digital marketing to replace trade shows? And there's a couple ways to do that, I think, and some of them are being done successfully by our clients. Number one is that they've produced videos on some of the topics they would talk about at a trade show. So they've used a YouTube channel to basically create simple, not complicated videos that can explain some of the things that they would normally do in person at a trade show. Now, that the benefit of that is that YouTube is the second most widely used search engine in the world. So when people search for these phrases, then your content can come up with that, because when in YouTube, they're typically using words like how to, or how to become, or how can I make. Those are all great content opportunities for YouTube. The second thing that we're seeing people do is you have the ability in a number of platforms to find people who mirror the characteristics of your best buyers. So if you have a great customer list and it's like 200 people or 500 people or more, in many platforms, including Google Ads, you can upload that customer list. And then what's going to go on behind the scenes is something called data append. So now it happens at a level that is frankly scary to a lot of people. So they're going to take a look at a lot of the attributes of the people on this list. This is all anonymous. There's no personally identifiable information going on here. And they're going to try to match the attributes of the people that you've uploaded with other people on the internet. So think about how great this is if you're particularly selling a niche product. So they're going to look at what are the common types of internet behaviors, what are the common types of demographic attributes that you have. So the bigger your customer list is, the more reliable that data is going to be. And so then you can use these digital platforms to go out and find people. So instead of them coming to the trade show to meet you, now to some extent you're going to find them, but it isn't finding the needle in the haystack. It's you're finding them based on this data append that is now available to you through these platforms. And just think about, 5-7 years ago, if we all wanted to do this data append, you were talking about a very expensive process. The difference being we don't get the results, meaning 5 to 7 years ago, if I went to a data append company, gave them my customer list, and they attached data to it, they would hand me back the results of their work. In this case, the platforms are going to do that same type of data append, but I don't get the results of it. I just get to run my ads in front of people who match that criteria that's now been developed. So lots of companies are suffering without being able to go to trade shows now, and I'm not sure what the future of trade shows is going to be after COVID. So I think mastering those two techniques are going to be valuable for anybody.
Thanks. And obviously you've seen a lot of changes, not just with your business, but in others. What are some other trends that you think, for our members and attendees as far as changes to a website? Are there trends out there that you see may help their businesses down the line as we kind of move into more of a virtual world?
Definitely, I'd highlight two. And the second one is going to be a little disappointing that we're still talking about it, but I'll come to the first one first, and that's just really understanding the specifics. And this is true particularly with the manufacturers that we talk about. People that look for manufacturers are typically looking for something very specific, and that's not going to surprise anybody on the call. But what is going to surprise people is how few manufacturing websites are lined up with the very specifics of what people look for. I mean, down to the nitty-gritty of part names and model names and acronyms that are used. That's what people go for. Remember that people search in waves, right? So they may search for manufacturer that builds X, and then they find that somebody builds X, and they might be looking for what are the pluses and minuses of X versus Y. They really get into the weeds on Google, and you know this is true because we all do it. So now turn the mirror on ourselves. Do we have enough content on our website to match the level of detail and specificity that people go to Google to pursue? That's a huge trend, and manufacturers have got to get better at that. The second one is, I hate to use this word, we're still using it, mobile. Still a lot of websites out there that aren't putting forth a great mobile experience. Now, we've seen a little bit of a retreat in this during COVID. When people are home, they have more likely to be in front of their laptops. So this massive mobile linear trajectory that we saw, just like a rocket going up, has plateaued just a little bit since COVID, but still increasing. What that means for us as business owners is we got to look through the same lens that our prospects are looking through. If we're looking at our website, going home and calling up our website and say, yeah, I went to this presentation from MACF, I'm going to take a look at my website on a desktop, that's probably your first error. Take a look at your website on your phone. And you'll probably get a more relevant look at what most of your prospects are seeing. So if you don't look at the experience the way that your users do, then it's going to be very, very difficult to be successful. And we've been talking about making sure you serve up a good mobile experience for nearly half a decade now. But for whatever reason, still a lot of businesses are not making that transformation.
Thanks, Matt. I want to thank you for your time today. Obviously, you have so much experience, many years of experience in this technology arena, and so your insight has just been very helpful. Also, I'd like to take a minute. I want to thank Florida Makes again for their continued support of our manufacturers and of these platforms for us to have these great discussions and webinars. And we want to thank all of you for your participation today in this webinar. We have some great upcoming events and webinars, so you can go to our MACF website to get those updates for events. Also, as you exit the webinar, we do want your feedback. So if you continue to have questions or future topics that you'd like to hear, or feedback on how to improve our webinars to better meet your needs and other topics of value to you, please reach out and let us know. Matt, I'll give you a chance for any final thoughts you may have, and from there we'll go ahead and end today's session.
That's it. Make sure you visit Grow with Google at google.com/grow for all of the resources, and stay in touch with MACF for more programs just like this. Thanks everyone for participating.